What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are cooking up the top 10 decks of the week. That's right, we are doing the top 10 decks of the week, and usually when we do this, we do a full-on meta report, breaking down the meta share, win rate, top-in rate, and the win-in rate of all the top decks in the game alongside the top 10 decks. However, I decided to split it into two videos this week, one being the top 10 decks, and then tomorrow I will be dropping the full-on meta report. It's just becoming too much information to put into one video, so this is how we are doing it going forward. And as for the top 10 decks of the week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really showcase the decks that actually won. However, out of the 10 tournaments that I looked at with 300 or more people, if the same deck or the same kind of deck won more than once, I will only cover that deck, which leaves some room to view and showcase some more interesting cooks that actually had some really cool top-ins, things like an Eveelutions deck, and that will be the last deck I will showcase on this video, so stay tuned right until the end to check that out because it's pretty damn cool. And with that being said, let's get in to the first deck. So this is the first deck, and it won first place in the Mythical Island qualifying tournament number 2, and it's very similar to the first deck we looked at last week on the list, and it's the Greninja Tauros Mew deck. It's basically what I've been calling like a tech box deck, except this week they included a couple of extra tech cards such as Marshadow and Hitmonlee, and then a Farfetch to get in some early game damage to be able to put a tremendous amount of pressure on their opponents. So this is basically a deck that allows you to play all the best tech cards in one deck, and this is becoming more and more popular. Now, usually what this is actually two Druddigon and the two Greninja lines with a Tauros and a Mew. However, the Druddagons have been removed and been replaced with these fighting tech cards, the Marshadow and the Hitmonlee, and it's so good because basically you can answer any situation that you're in. You can answer an early game pressure with Farfetch'd. You can answer the Gyarados issue with Hitmonlee by sniping those Magikarps. You can answer the I've just been knocked out on the previous turn issue by getting that revenge knockout with your Marshadow. You could also answer the major EX problem in the game today. It's not really a problem, it's just almost every single meta relevant deck is an EX deck. Things like Gyarados, Mewtwo, Pikachu, what else? Exeggutor, Celebi, all the big decks have a major amount of EX Pokemon in them. For instance, the Arcanine deck, or even the Arcanine Moltres with Mew EX. That's 3 different EX Pokemon you have in the game. So Tauros has a ton of tremendous value, especially since you can trade a 2-for-1. And this is, for all intents and purposes, a single prize deck. Yes, you are playing the Mew EX, but only at 1 copy. And there might be even games where you just don't put it down at all. However, it is probably the best tech card in the game to tech into almost any deck because it only requires colorless energy, which means it can literally be put in any single deck. So it's just super duper good, and I love this style of deck, this new what I call a tech box deck. But with that being said, let's get into the next deck. Speaking of Greninja, the good old Gyarados EX Greninja Druddigon deck won first place in the Ursi Day tournament with nearly 2,000 people. It was 1,995 people in the tournament, and it was won by a player named Lead, and this deck continues to do great ever since it came out with the release of Mythical Island, and it's such a catch-22 deck. There's so many pros and so many cons of this deck. For instance, you are playing so many Pokemon. You're playing 12 Pokemon, and one of them is a stage 2. So this deck can be very bricky because not only are you playing a stage 2, but you're also playing it with 2 stage 1s or 2 stage 1 lines, 2 Gyarados lines with 2 Greninja lines. And then, of course, you need to get that Druddigon into the active as quickly as possible to kind of start setting up everything. So if you brick, it can become an issue. However, it's still super strong and super good. And the other catch-22 thing about this deck is the Magikarp into Gyarados. We know how strong Gyarados can be, but we also know how weak the Magikarp can be. If the Magikarp is in the active and you can't get it out, then you're basically going to lose it by the one attack from any single Pokemon. Not just that, but even if it's on the bench, it can be easily sniped by 2 very relevant Pokemon in the meta right now, being Hitmonlee and Zeb Strika. Not only that, but because Gyarados is so strong, you have to be able to make sure you get all those energy on him. But you are playing the Misty, which again is a very kind of catch-22 card, because yes, you can ramp those energy very quickly with something like a Misty. However, if you hit that Tails, it's a massive neg, and well, you never want to go neg 1, especially in a card game. And the reason why this deck does so well is, of course, not only because Gyarados is so strong, but because you have Druddigon and Greninja as a package in this deck, basically doing a ton of free damage. And that is why we are not playing things like Giovanni, very similar to Baby Pidgeot, not needing to have Sabrina in those types of decks, because once you get it online, you basically have an every turn Sabrina. In this case, once you have a Druddigon or a Greninja, you basically have an every turn Giovanni and more. Another thing that makes Gyarados super duper strong is not just his attack, but its HP. There's only really one card that can take out a Gyarados in one shot, and that is something like a Charizard, and those decks are few and far between right now. They're not as popular as they once were, and because water is so in the top of the meta right now, it's a lot harder for Charizard and fire decks to do very well. That doesn't mean they're not doing well, but again, when you only really have one Pokemon that can knock out the Gyarados, because if you think of it, 180 HP, you can't be knocked out by Mewtwo, even with the Giovanni. Even if Mewtwo played something like Greninja, you can't do it. Gyarados, the same thing. You would basically have to have a Gyarados that attacks into a Greninja, and then your Gyarados hits theirs, plus a Greninja, or what did I say that wrong? Their Gyarados has to attack into your Druddigon, then you have to attack them with their Gyarados, and also use the ability from Greninja. This deck has so many things going for it, but again, so many pros and so many cons. However, it continues to do well, and not only that, but continues to win tournaments outright. And with that being said, let's get into the next deck. Speaking of fire decks, this is not a Charizard deck, but it is the Arcanine Moltres teched in with Mew EX, and this deck won a tournament. It was a 385 person tournament. It was called the Fox Cave Battle Arena #1, and it was piloted by a player named Ramari, and this deck finally gets back on top. It feels like fire decks have not really won a big tournament in a really long time, and it's for a couple of reasons. As mentioned, water decks with Gyarados are so strong right now, so it's very hard for fire decks to get off the ground. Not to mention Moltres is also weak to electric, and Pikachu is probably still the best deck in the game right now. However, this deck did win a 385 person tournament, and it's still very good. And of course, the Arcanine we know what it does. It's that one Pokemon in your deck that does just enough damage to be able to knock out very low HP Pokemon that are relevant. So not only that, but because we're playing Giovanni's, we're going to be able to knock out things like Exeggutor EX, Celebi EX. They are both weak to fire, as well as things like Pikachu EX. And then for the decks that play these higher HP Pokemon, things like Mewtwo, and we have the Mew EX, and of course this is also very good against Charizard. However, like I said, Charizard doesn't really seem to be relevant right now. It's also, again, fire decks, the reason why they're not doing so well is not just because of the water, but it's kind of like the water deck actually replaced the fire deck, because Gyarados is that one big HP Pokemon that could one-shot the entire meta basically. So just like Charizard, however, the water deck is just better and also counters that one big Charizard deck as well. But now that we have the Mew EX, we have just eliminated the Charizard from this Arcanine deck, so I'm not even sure what we would call this one anymore. However, it did get back on top. I'm glad to see it. I don't think it'll stay on top for very long. I still think there's too many decks that just completely outpace this deck for so many different reasons. First of all, all the big Pokemon that do huge damage completely knock out all of these Pokemon in this deck. It plays 3 different EX Pokemon, 5 total. It's weak to water. There are decks that aren't even water that just go way too quickly. The Pikachu deck is too fast. It'll just completely take this deck out before it gets online sometimes. Even the new fighting decks, the Aerodactyl, the Primeape, these decks do a lot of damage for low energy very, very quickly and can just take decks out like this very often. Again, I'm glad to see it, but I don't think it'll be here very long. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck. So this is the next deck. It's the Celebi Exeggutor and Superior deck. This deck won 2 tournaments this week. The first tournament being the PGR, the Pokemon Go Raider New Year tournament, and it was 665 people. This deck went 11-1 and was piloted by a player named Sushi. The next tournament it won was called the Frog EX tournament. This deck went 12-2 in a 512 player tournament, and the player who won this, I'm going to butcher their name, it's Faramgilia. I'm sorry I butchered it, but this deck again still continues to do very well. However, I do think we have not figured out Celebi EX completely yet. I feel like we've always have had Mewtwo EX figured out. We have right now definitely figured out the best build for Pikachu because of the Gyarados is definitely the Substrika build. And then we eventually found the Charizard at one point being the Charizard Arcanine build. Now I'm not sure if it's the Arcanine Mew EX build because they're both not doing very great, but it's probably the Arcanine EX. But again, Celebi feels like one of those decks where we're not so sure the best build. Yes, this build did win a 665 person tournament and then a 512, but last week we showcased an Exeggutor EX deck with 1 Celebi and 1 Mew EX and no Superior. I actually prefer that build. This deck is playing 13 Pokemon and only 1 Erica. It's also playing a Leaf and an X-Speed, and even though I like Leaf and X-Speed, I don't think the Leaf is tremendously necessary in this deck because you are playing the Superior. I also don't like playing 3 Exeggutor. It just creates too much of a brick in an already very bricky deck. Even with 12 Pokemon, it feels very bricky. And the Leaf, I would drop that for the second Erica. This deck is only playing 1. And again, I'm not going to say this isn't a good build. It did win a humongous tournament, and I'm not the one who piloted it. In fact, I don't think I would ever be able to pilot this deck into a 665 person winning event. So congratulations to Sushi for doing that. However, again, we keep seeing all these different Celebi builds. I do believe the Exeggutor EX over the other Exeggutors is the best build, but I will say the baby EX or the baby Exeggutor from Mythical Island, I do think it has a ton of value in the current meta right now. There are so many decks still, even since the beginning, that play a ton of energy on their Pokemon. And even if you're attacking a Pokemon with like 3 energy, something like a Mew EX, you will get a ton of damage. In fact, you actually knock out a Mew EX with your baby Exeggutor with 3 energy attached to the Mew EX. So this deck is still doing very good. I don't think we found out the final perfect build for this yet, the end game build, but this build did win 2 tournaments this week. And with that being said, let's get into the next deck. So this is the next deck. It's good old Pikachu EX, except for it has Galvantula. Usually in these decks, it's 2 Zebstrika and a Dedenne with 2 Zapdos and 2 Pikachu. But this deck decided to go with not the standard Zebstrika build, but adding in 2 Galvantula, which is super duper interesting. And this deck won a 546 person tournament, the PLL tournament. It was piloted by Santi McGoob, great name. Went 12-2-1, and this deck is the only very special build. That's why I wanted to showcase this. Pikachu did win 3 tournaments this week. The other 2 were the standard Zebstrika builds. They were the Pocket Aces tournament with 512 people, where it went 9-0 and was piloted by Arcaninos. The next one was the Paldea Pro League with 416 players and was piloted by Ultravioletto, and it went 11-1. But let's talk about this build. I love it. Galvantula. I just posted 2 videos on Galvantula on my channel. Pardon me. The first one being a Galvantula Electrode Dodrio build, and then the next one being a video comparing Arbok and Galvantula, since they both have the same effect for their attack. I also said in those videos that I tested Galvantula and Pikachu EX builds, and I did not like it. However, the way I tested it is I took out the 2 Zebstrika from the standard Pikachu build, and I put in the Galvantula just to see how it would feel. It's very similar in attack to Electrode, but it has 1 retreat instead of 0 retreat, and has the lockdown effect. And I actually didn't like it all that much. I also didn't like it because I felt like it felt too much like a Pikachu deck. I wanted it to feel more like a Galvantula deck, and I didn't get much value out of the Galvantula. I was said that I would have rather just played the Electrode and gotten the free retreat, or played the Zebstrika, and in this case, the player played both Zebstrika and Galvantula, which I do think is probably the better way to play it, because you still want those Zebstrika. This still needs to be a Pikachu EX deck. Like I said, when I built it, I didn't want it to feel like the Pikachu EX deck, but that's exactly what it did, and it's because it's a Pikachu EX deck. But this deck, of course, wants the Pikachu EX. It wants at least the 1 Zapdos. I've been saying this for a while. I don't think you need 2 Zapdos EX. Zapdos is really the end game. Let's get those coin flips, knock those Pokemon out with humongous damage. It is very valuable in the beginning, but I do not think you need 2. So I do like the addition of the Galvantula in this deck. You're still playing these 3 main important Pokemon in this deck, the Zebstrika, the Pikachu, and the Zapdos, but now you're playing the Galvantula, which is super duper cool. You can lock down those Pokemon, keep them in spot, and even if they knock you out, they're still locked in, so you can knock them out on the following turn. Hopefully it's an EX, and again, I talk about this all the time, trade in the 2 for 1. The one issue I had said I had with Galvantula was the fact that its HP is way too low. 80 HP is not strong enough, because yes, you lock a Pokemon in place, but if that Pokemon is loaded up with energy, they're just gonna knock you out anyways. The best example for that is Pikachu EX. Even if you place energy first and you get the first attack off, you lock that Pikachu in, but now your enemy's Pikachu has 2 energy and they just knock you out. You can't even save yourself with something like a blue. It doesn't matter, you'll still be knocked out by the 90 damage. But I'm so happy to see this build and not just the standard Zebstrika Pikachu build that we've been seeing everywhere. It is still very standard, but the addition of Galvantula is super duper cool. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck. So this is the next deck. It's the Mewtwo Gardevoir deck and teched in with the Mew EX. Usually we see only 2 versions of this deck really, and it's Mew EX or the Jinx version. You're either playing one or the other. So both decks usually playing something like 9 Psychic Pokemon. In this case, they're actually playing 10, and I absolutely love the 10th Psychic. Before we get into it, this deck won a tournament. It was the Monday Meta tournament. It was piloted by a player named Kate Pokey, and it was a 366 person tournament, and they chose to add the 10th Psychic, like I said, and it was the Sigilyph, and the Sigilyph is tremendous in this deck. Not only do you now have an additional target in your deck for the mythical slab, but you have an additional way to thin through your deck. So we already play the Professor's Research, the Pokeballs like every other deck, but the one advantage that this deck has as a Psychic deck is the mythical slab. So not only can you thin through your deck more, but now you have a higher chance of actually hitting with the mythical slab because you're playing the additional Pokemon, and the additional Pokemon that you're playing also thins through your deck because the Sigilyph, when you attack with it, draws a card from your deck, very similar to Meowth. This is the only deck that has a package like this. It has the most deck thinning possibilities. This version actually reminds me a lot of a deck called Chaos Turbo from GOAT Format Yu-Gi-Oh! GOAT Format Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a 2005 retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. It's a format I'm very familiar with. I've played it for years. I've topped in tournaments, like big tournaments within that format. And it reminds me of the Chaos Turbo deck, and that deck is the best deck in GOAT format because what it does is it turbos through your deck quickly and faster than any other deck to get into those important pieces, the main pieces of your deck, the main strategy of your deck, extremely fast. And this is really the only deck that can do that kind of thing in Pokemon TCG Pocket right now. Again, I'll say it, the Professor's Research, the Pokeballs, the Mythical Slabs, and the Sigilyph all thin through your deck, and if you can get every single one of them to hit something, then you just constantly get through your entire deck. If both Pokeballs hit a basic, if both slabs hit something else, and then you get to draw cards with your Sigilyph and your Professor's Research, you're going to get into those Gardevoir lines very quickly. You're going to get those Mew EX on the board with, again, then get energies on them really quickly. You're going to turbo through your deck tremendously. So I love this build. I love the 10th Psychic. I love the Sigilyph being the 10th. And I think I would love to see if this is the version that continues to do really well. Because again, I think it's just the one deck that could thin through your deck and be as consistent as possible, more than every other deck in the game. But anyways, with that being said, we are done with the first place decks. Now we are going to get into the very interest in builds, the other top end decks that I hand chose to showcase this week in the top 10 decks of the week. So let's get into the next deck. So this is the next deck, and it's another Psychic deck, and it's Gengar EX, baby. Yes, I'm so happy when I see these cooks making tops of tournaments, and not only that, it got 4th place in a 300 or more person tournament, and it did it with Mew and Jinx. Usually when I play Gengar, I play it with a Psyduck because Psyduck has the same effect as Gengar, except it's an attack, and when you attack your opponent with your Psyduck, you lock them out of playing supporters on their following turn. And I've always said Gengar EX comes on line way too late to get any real value out of them if they've already played things like Professor's Research or Misty's or whatever it may be. At the beginning of the game, you're just not getting enough value out of the Gengar EX. However, this player did it. They got 4th place, and I absolutely love it. And they're playing it with Mew EX, and Mew EX in this deck works in 2 ways, because not only is it a great attacker that can copy your opponent's attacks, but because we're playing it with the Button Expeditioner, you can actually tank with your Mew for a couple of turns while you evolve into your Gengar EX, get the energies possibly on it, and then you just bounce your Mew EX back, deny them any prize cards at all, and then lock them out of the game from playing supporters, and then start attacking in for damage. And then what we have is we have a Jinx. Jinx is very similar to the Exeggutor, Baby Exeggutor that we just talked about in the Celebi deck. And it's because they both, along with Alakazam, have the exact same attack. It's even the exact same name. It's called Psychic. And basically what it does, they all have different base damage, but then they do additional damage for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. This is really good right now because there's so many decks that play Pokemon that require a lot of energy. We said it before, things like Charizard, Gyarados, Mewtwo. You sometimes won't get all the value when facing Mewtwo because if Mewtwo's already attacked, it's discarded too, and it's only left with 2 energy, so you might not get that knockout. But it's also really good because a lot of the time you already have damage on these Pokemon, and then Jinx could come in and just sweep the game for only 2 energy requirement. We're of course not playing the Psyduck like I do because you're playing Mythical Slab and you want all the targets in your deck that are Pokemon to be Psychic Pokemon. So of course that's what you're going to do, and then you're playing X speed because you need to make sure you get the Pokemon you want out in the forefront, and that being the Mew EX. As I said, you can tank with it for a bit and then bounce it back with the Button Expeditioner. But anyways, with that being said, let's get into the next deck. So this is the next deck, and it's Articuno 18 Trainer, kind of, because it's actually 17 trainers, because one of the trainers we are playing is the Old Amber. So we can play Aerodactyl EX in the deck. I think this is super duper cool. It's the 18 trainer deck, as we all know, and it got 7th place in a 300 or more person tournament. And so this deck, we already know 18 trainer and what it does. We've not heard about it in a very long time because usually it's not that good, and I still don't think it's that good, but getting 7th place, I had to talk about it. It still works very much and very similar to how it did in the past. You're playing the Misties, hoping you get that Misty on the turn 1. You play it, and then you start sweeping games with Articuno EX. However, now we have an Aerodactyl EX, and I don't know if we're playing the fighting type energy, man. I don't know. Maybe we are. I think it would be cool if we were. It's kind of hard because the Articuno EX, its main attack for 80 damage, the Blizzard attack takes 2 water and 1 colorless, so I'm not sure if we're actually playing the fighting. However, As valuable as Aerodactyl EX, its ability would be in this deck, I'm not so sure if we want the extra Pokemon on the bench that can't attack. However, we do have X speeds at any given time, possibly, and one leaf to possibly get the Aerodactyl out. But I would imagine they would want this Pokemon, if you're only playing 3, to have an attack as well. But again, I'm not so sure. I still just think this is super duper cool. I mean, listen, 18 trainer Articuno, 7th place in a 300 person tournament is absolutely insane. If you can, this is a crazy combo, okay? Not only do you have Articuno, that if you hit it with a Misty, you can just basically two-shot any Pokemon EX that will be in the front. But you can also combo Sabrina and Aerodactyl, because if you're taking time to get your Articuno online, you can Sabrina a Pokemon that evolves into the front and then evolve into an Aerodactyl EX and lock them out from being able to evolve that Pokemon. And then you can just knock out that Pokemon with your Articuno EX. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. You get a guaranteed Articuno in your hand, and then you have an additional Pokemon that you can tank with and possibly retreat so that you can build up your other Articuno and then bring it in and then just win the game. So again, super duper cool. I think anytime you see Articuno EX, you go, ugh, I hate that deck. It's so stupid. But it won, not won, but it got 7th place in a tournament. So I needed to showcase it. And with that being said, let's get in to the next deck. So this is the next deck, and Blastoise is back on the menu again. We talked about a Blastoise deck that won a tournament last week with Druddigon in the front, and I thought it was really cool. Blastoise does not get a lot of shine in pocket. It's just outmatched by a lot of Pokemon. However, this is the second top in a row that this card has gotten, and this got 12th place in a 300 or more person tournament and was piloted by Jeff Hoogland, another content creator. This is not the first time he's made a pretty decent top in a very large tournament with a very interesting build. So again, Druddigon is just all over the place. It's just such a good card, and Tauros as well. These two cards in your deck make this deck really, really good. For instance, your Druddigon, you put it in the front, you tank, you do a bunch of free damage when people attack into you, so you can build up the Blastoise in the back, or evolve the Blastoise in the back, and possibly build energy on the Tauros. Because you're playing Misties, what you can actually do is you just manually put things on your Tauros, build that up, and then put your Misty's energies onto your Blastoise. Or what you can do, and it's probably in most cases what you're doing, is you're deciding at the beginning of the game which one you want to focus on first. So do you want to get that Tauros online and then just knock out something like that Pikachu EX or that Celebi with a Giovanni? Or do you need to build up the Blastoise so you can knock out things like Mewtwo EX by getting that extra energy on Blastoise? You're going to definitely knock out a ton of Pokemon in the game that is relevant in the meta right now. So again, Blastoise making another huge top, and Tauros and Druddigon being teched into a ton of decks because they're just super duper valuable. Druddigon's probably the best tank. Tauros is one of the best tech cards, and Blastoise is super duper underplayed but has a ton of energy and can do a ton of damage and can get a ton of energy put on it so it can have that attack because you're playing things like Misty. And of course you're going to play the Leaf because Leaf allows both your Tauros and your Druddigon to retreat for free, and then Blastoise, it's a 3 retreat. So the Leaf are going to be played in this deck over things like an X speed. Anyways, with that being said, let's get into our final deck, the Eveelutions. If you stuck around this long, you're not going to regret it, because an Eveelutions deck got 16th place in a tournament this week with 300 or more people. So this is the last deck on the top 10 decks of the week, baby, and it's an Eveelutions deck. It's only playing 2 of the 3 current Eveelutions that we have. It's the Vaporeon, the original Vaporeon from Genetic Apex, because we're not going to play the new one. We're not playing other water Pokemon except for the 2 Vaporeon. So we're playing the original Vaporeon with the Flareon with Druddigon. And of course, this deck works so well because Druddigon requires fire and water energy, which means not only can you attack with your Druddigon, but as well as your Flareon and Vaporeon. So you have every card in your deck being able to attack. It's one thing most Druddigon decks do not have is the ability to actually attack with the Druddigon. And Vaporeon is not the strongest Pokemon that there is. However, it does have a pretty decent body with 130, and when you attack with it for 60 damage, even though it requires 3 energy and we are playing Misties, it actually heals 30 damage from itself. So it is pretty damn tanky, very similar to Lapras EX. And then because we're playing the Vaporeon, we're also playing Flareon because your Eevee can evolve into both of them. That's pretty cool. And your Flareon only requires 1 fire energy of the 3. The other 2 are colorless. The issue with Flareon is that it discards an energy. So basically, you're doing 110 damage, which is pretty decent, especially with the Giovanni. You will knock out a Pikachu with a Vaporeon. You will 2-shot a Pikachu before it gets to 2-shot you some of the time. If you get the first attack off, you can obviously make that possible with things like the Misty and then the Druddigon as well, with the Giovanni doing 90 plus the 20 that you would have gotten from the Pikachu attacking you if it didn't knock you out with its Giovanni of its own, means you will also knock that out. We are also playing a Farfetch'd, a single Farfetch'd, so that we can get some, additional damage early on in the game, or to come in and just do some cleanup work with 40 damage. We're also playing things like Blue, which is really interesting, I guess, to get through certain breakpoints. This is also a single prize deck, which is really good in a EX format because your opponent obviously has to take out more Pokemon than you will have to. They will have to take out at least 3 Pokemon, whereas you will only have to most likely take out 2, even if it's a little harder. But when you have something like Vaporeon, like I said, that can possibly stay on the field for quite a bit of time, as well as a Flareon that could one-shot EX Pokemon, and then Druddigon that can help to get additional free damage plus do an attack of its own. This deck actually kind of works, and it's actually really, really cool. I love to see cooks. That's what my channel is all about, is making fun and interesting cooks. You'll rarely ever see me play like meta defining decks. I'm trying to find a new meta deck by playing things that would be considered off meta to see if they are viable in the meta, and even if they aren't, are they fun? Do they make sense? Do they synergize? Are they cool? And are they cooks? But anyways, with that being said, thank you for tuning in. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I apologize if the quality of this video was a little bit less than it usually is. I'm just extremely exhausted. This is why I had to split the video into 2 videos. Tomorrow you'll get the full meta report with the meta share, the win rates, all that kind of breakdown tomorrow in a separate video. There's just so much going on. the holidays, back to work, back to the real grind that is content creation. So thank you all so much for tuning into my videos. I appreciate it a lot more than you think. I'm very close to making partner, and it's all because of everybody tuning into my videos each day, each week. Thank you all so much. Like, subscribe, and share, and as always, keep cooking.